I used to believe that silence was just the absence of sound, the comfort of a library at dusk. I never imagined it could be the heavy, suffocating weight that follows a gunshot. My life has always been a collection of quiet chapters, but tonight at the Sapphire Gala, someone tore the pages right out of the binding. There is only before this night, and the terrifying after that is currently staring me in the face. The museum's grand hall was a sea of predatory elegance. I stood near a marble pillar, my fingers white-knuckled around a glass of sparkling water I was too nervous to drink. This silk dress, a gift from my sister, clung to me like a second skin, making me feel exposed rather than beautiful. Around me, the elite of the city moved with the grace of sharks, their laughter sharp enough to draw blood. I was a plain book in a room full of gold-leaf journals, and I couldn't wait for the clock to strike midnight so I could disappear back to my stacks. That's when the air in the room shifted. It wasn't a noise, it was a sudden, chilling silence that rippled through the crowd. I followed their gaze to the top of the grand staircase. Derek Osmond. He didn't just enter a room, he owned the oxygen within it. He was dressed in black that seemed to absorb the light of the chandeliers. His face was a masterpiece of cold stone, a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that looked like they'd seen the end of the world and hadn't been impressed. Even from the floor, I could feel the gravity of him, a dark moon pulling at my tides. "Don't even breathe in his direction, Bella," my sister whispered, appearing at my elbow, her face pale. "Who is he?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. "Derek Osmond. The Shadow of the North. People call him a businessman, but he's the kind of man whose favor is a cage and whose anger is a grave. If he looks at you, you're already lost." I promised her I'd stay away. It was an easy promise to make, until the noise of the gala became too much to bear. An hour later, I slipped through the glass doors of the terrace, desperate for the biting night air. The city lights below looked like fallen stars. I wandered toward the shadows of the stone balustrade, seeking the silence I knew so well. But the silence here wasn't empty. It was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the metallic tang of gunpowder. I froze. Just beyond the trellis, 3 men stood like statues. In the center, a man was on his knees, his face a mask of terror. Derek Osmond stood over him, his shadow stretching across the stone like a shroud. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. He spoke in a whisper that was more terrifying than any scream. "You thought you could steal from my legacy?" He pressed a gloved hand to the man's shoulder. "Make sure he never sees the sun again." I took a stumbling step back, my heel clicking against the marble with the force of a thunderclap. Every dark suit turned. My breath hitched, trapped in my throat like a dying bird. Then, Derek's eyes locked onto mine. There was no warmth, no surprise, only a cold, lethal calculation that made the world tilt on its axis. "Go," he commanded his men, never breaking eye contact with me. As they dragged the man into the darkness, Derek stepped toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. I was no longer a witness. I was a problem he was about to solve. The silence between us was a predator, thick and suffocating. Derek Osmond didn't blink. He simply watched me as if deciding whether to crush me or keep me. Behind him, the shadows of the terrace seemed to bleed into his very frame. I wanted to run, but my legs were anchors of lead. Before I could find my voice to plead, he moved. In 2 swift, silent strides, he was in my space, the scent of expensive sandalwood and cold rain wrapping around me like a shroud. "You have very unfortunate timing, Bella Rose," he whispered, his voice a low vibration that rattled my ribcage. My name on his lips felt like a brand. I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't told anyone here my name. Before I could process the terror of his knowledge, his gloved hand clamped firmly around my upper arm. It wasn't a brutal grip, but it was absolute. He began to lead me back toward the glass doors of the ballroom, his pace relentless. "Don't look back," he commanded, his eyes fixed ahead. "If you want to live through the next 10 minutes, you will do exactly as I say. You are no longer a guest. You are mine." We burst through the doors and back into the warmth and light of the gala. The transition was jarring. The smell of lilies and expensive perfume replaced the scent of gunpowder, but the danger hadn't vanished. It had simply changed its mask. The orchestra was playing a haunting, mid-tempo waltz. Without a word, Derek pulled me into the center of the dance floor. He spun me into his arms, one hand splaying across the small of my back while the other locked with mine. To the elite around us, we looked like the picture of dark romance, but I could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his eyes scanned the perimeter over my shoulder. "Smile, Bella," he urged, his face inches from mine. "My enemies are watching, and they are wondering why the Shadow of the North is dancing with a librarian. Give them a reason to fear touching you. I saw them then, men in the corners of the room, their hands tucked inside their jackets, their eyes fixed on us with lethal curiosity. I was marked. I was a target. My heart hammered against my chest like a trapped bird, and in a moment of pure white-hot adrenaline, I realized that playing the victim would get me killed. I needed to be more than a witness. I reached up, my fingers trembling as I cupped his cold, sculpted jaw. Derek's eyes widened a fraction, a flicker of genuine surprise breaking through his stone mask. I pulled him down and pressed my lips to his. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was a desperate, frantic claim, a public seal of association. When I pulled back, the room seemed to have lost its sound. Derek stared at me, his gaze dark and unreadable. He leaned in, his breath hot against my ear as he whispered the words that ended my old life forever. You don't even know what you've set in motion, Bella. The heavy mahogany doors of the Metropolitan Library usually felt like a sanctuary, but today they felt like the bars of a gilded cage. I tried to focus on the rhythmic thud of the date stamper and the comforting scent of old parchment, but my skin still prickled with the ghost of Derek's touch. The morning news had been a blur of high society gossip, yet beneath the headlines of the Sapphire Gala, there was a jagged silence regarding the man I had kissed in front of the city's most powerful monsters. Bella, a courier left this for you, my supervisor said, dropping a thick, cream-colored envelope on my desk. Her eyes were wide, darting toward the front entrance. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was no letter, only a single, preserved black rose and a heavy gold key. There was no signature, but the air around the desk suddenly smelled of sandalwood and cold rain. I looked up and my heart missed a beat. The library was no longer empty. Two men in charcoal suits stood like pillars at the end of the history aisle, their hands clasped in front of them, their gazes fixed on the door. They weren't browsing, they were guarding. Through the tall arched windows, I saw a black sedan idling at the curb, its tinted glass reflecting the morning sun like a dark mirror. Panic flared in my chest. I grabbed my coat and headed for the side exit, desperate to slip away from the suffocating watch of the Osmond Syndicate. I hurried down the alleyway, my breath coming in short, jagged bursts. I just needed to reach the subway to vanish into the crowd of normal people who didn't know the name Derek Osmond. I turned the corner and stopped dead. Derek was leaning against the brick wall of the alley, a charcoal overcoat draped over his broad shoulders. He looked entirely out of place against the grit of the city backstreets, yet he dominated the space as if he'd built the city himself. He checked a silver pocket watch before sliding it away, his icy gaze pinning me to the spot. The back exit was a predictable choice, Bella, he said, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. I told you that you were mine. That wasn't a suggestion, it was a fact of your survival. I don't want to be protected, I snapped, though my voice betrayed me with a slight quiver. I want my life back. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me, tall and absolute. The moment you kissed me on that dance floor, your old life burned to ash. My enemies don't see a librarian when they look at you now. They see a target. They see the only thing Derek Osmond might actually care to keep. He reached out, his thumb grazing my lower lip, his expression unreadable. You set the clock in motion. Now you'll have to learn to live by its rhythm. The basement archives of the library were a labyrinth of cold stone and forgotten ink, a place where the city's sounds died a quiet death. I had spent the afternoon shelving heavy ledgers, trying to ignore the two shadows Derek had stationed at the top of the stairs. But the archives had a second entrance, an old service tunnel that didn't appear on the modern blueprints. I heard the click of a heel on stone before I saw the movement. It wasn't the heavy, disciplined step of Derek's men. It was light, hurried, and accompanied by the faint scrape of metal against a holster. I retreated into the narrow gap between two towering shelves, my heart hammering against my ribs. Bella rose, a voice hissed, echoing through the stacks. It wasn't Derek. It was a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, holding a silenced pistol with practiced ease. The Shadow's little pet. You've caused a lot of trouble for the Vane family. I pressed my back against the cold metal of the shelves, my breath hitching. He was closer now, the smell of cheap tobacco cutting through the scent of old paper. I reached back, my hand closing around a heavy, brass-bound ledger. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all I had. Just as the man rounded the corner, a blur of movement erupted from the darkness behind him. A gloved hand clamped over the assassin's mouth, and a blade flashed in the dim light with surgical precision. There was no struggle, only the muffled sound of a body being guided to the floor. Derek stepped out of the shadows, his expression more lethal than the man he had just neutralized. He didn't look at the body, his eyes were locked on me, searching for a wound, a scratch, anything that would justify the storm brewing in his gaze. "I told you the library was no longer safe," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating register. He stepped over the fallen man and closed the distance between us, his presence filling the cramped aisle. He took the heavy ledger from my trembling hands and set it aside. "You're a librarian, Bella. You shouldn't have to hold a weapon." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my throat where the pulse was still erratic. "But as long as you are the woman who kissed the King of the North, you are a war zone. And I am the only one who can win this war." He didn't wait for a response. He gripped my waist and hoisted me toward the exit, his touch possessive and terrifyingly protective. The quiet life I had spent years building was gone, replaced by the scent of blood and the heat of a man who would burn the city down to keep me. The Osmond estate sat atop the city's highest ridge like a sleeping predator, all sharp glass and black steel. Inside, the air was pressurized with a different kind of silence, one of absolute control. Derek led me to a dining room where the table was a slab of dark obsidian, lit by a single low-hanging chandelier that cast more shadows than light. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He sat directly across from me, his presence demanding my undivided attention. The meal was served by silent staff who moved like ghosts, placing plates of seared venison and deep red wine between us. For a long time, the only sound was the rhythmic clink of silver against porcelain. Derek watched me with an intensity that made the food taste like ash in my mouth. He wasn't just eating, he was studying me, peeling back the layers of my composure. "You haven't asked about the man in the archives," he said finally, his voice cutting through the stillness. "I know what happened to him," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I'm a librarian, Derek. I've spent my life reading about tragedies. I don't need to see the ending to know how the story goes." Derek leaned back, swirling the wine in his glass. "Most people in your position would be screaming for the police or pleading for their lives. You, however, are eating dinner with a man you know just committed a murder. Why?" I looked him in the eye, refusing to flinch. "Because the police can't stop the veins and they certainly can't stop you. My only choice is to decide which monster I'm safer with. And right now, the monster across from me is the only one who hasn't tried to kill me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a rare, dangerous expression that transformed his face into something devastatingly handsome. "Honesty. It's a rare currency in my world, Bella. Most people tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me the truth even when it's an insult." He stood up and walked around the table, stopping behind my chair. He leaned down, his hands resting on the obsidian surface, effectively pinning me in place. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the cold glass of the house. "The veins want you because they think you are my weakness," he whispered, his breath warm against my neck. "They think that by breaking you they can break me. What they don't understand is that I don't have weaknesses. I only have property. And I protect what belongs to me with a ferocity they can't even imagine." He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "Tomorrow you will stay here. You will not leave this house until I say the city is clean. Do you understand? I have a job, Derek. I have a life." "You had a life," he corrected, his voice dropping to a gravelly tone. "Now you have a future. Whether it's a long one or a very short one depends entirely on how well you listen to me." The storm broke over the ridge with a violence that matched the man sleeping in the room down the hall. Thunder shook the floorboards of the guest suite, sounding like heavy artillery. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the lightning illuminate the black steel of the estate. Then a different sound cut through the rain, the sharp, rhythmic pop of suppressed gunfire. I didn't have time to scream before my door was thrown open. Derek stood there, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a heavy handgun in his grip. He didn't look like the polished businessman from the gala. He looked like a god of war. "Under the bed. Now," he commanded, his voice a low, jagged rasp. "Derek, what's happening?" I scrambled back as the sound of shattering glass echoed from the level below. "The veins are desperate. They've breached the perimeter," he said, moving to the window to scan the grounds. He turned back to me, his eyes burning with a terrifying protective fury. "Stay low. Do not move unless I come for you. If anyone else opens this door, you use the blade I put in your nightstand." The house became a symphony of chaos. Shouts, heavy boots on marble, and the metallic scent of ozone and blood filtered through the vents. I huddled in the darkness, clutching the cold hilt of the knife, realizing that my quiet life had been replaced by a reality where life was measured in seconds and ammunition. A heavy thud sounded against my door, followed by the splintering of wood. A man I didn't recognize lunged into the room, his face masked, his weapon raised. Before he could fire, a shadow swept behind him. Derek had circled back through the connecting terrace. He didn't use his gun. He used his hands with a terrifying, silent efficiency that left the intruder crumpled on the floor. Derek didn't pause. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the hallway, which was now choked with gray smoke. We moved through the house as the alarm system's red lights pulsed like a heartbeat. He ushered me into a reinforced safe room hidden behind a library shelf. Inside, the silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the war outside. Derek leaned against the steel door, his chest heaving, a smear of blood darkening his cheek. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw the cracks in his stone mask. It wasn't fear, it was the raw, bleeding realization of what having me near him actually cost. "You should hate me for this," he whispered, the adrenaline still coursing through him. I walked toward him, my hands trembling as I reached up to wipe the blood from his skin. "I should. But I'm still here, Derek. I'm not running." He let out a jagged breath and pulled me into him, his grip so tight it was nearly painful. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the steel walls, the only thing that mattered was the heat of the man who had turned my world into a battlefield, and the fact that I was beginning to realize I didn't want to be anywhere else. The morning sun was a cruel contrast to the carnage of the night before. It bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the estate, illuminating the dust motes dancing over shattered glass and bullet-pocked walls. The scent of ozone had been replaced by the smell of industrial cleaner, though nothing could quite scrub away the heavy, metallic memory of the violence. I found Derek in his private study. He wasn't behind his desk. He was standing by the window, staring out at the mist-covered valley. He had changed into a fresh white shirt, but he hadn't tucked it in, and his hair was uncharacteristically disheveled. On his desk sat two items that looked entirely out of place in his world of shadows: a thick manila envelope and a single airline ticket. He didn't turn around when I entered. "The Vane family is decimated, Bella. Last night was their final, desperate gasp. They won't be coming for you again." "Then it's over?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the vast, cold room. "For them, yes." He finally turned, his face a mask of exhausted granite. He tapped the manila envelope. "Inside this is a new identity. A clean slate. There is a bank account with enough money to ensure you never have to worry about rent or a struggling library ever again. The ticket is for a flight to Florence. My men will escort you to the airport in an hour." The air left my lungs as if I'd been struck. "You're sending me away?" "I am giving you your life back," he said, his voice dropping to a low, jagged vibration. "Look at this house, Bella. Look at what happened last night. You are a creature of light and books and quiet things. I am a man of blood. Every minute you spend with me, a piece of that light withers. I won't be the reason you go dark." He walked toward me, stopping just inches away, but he didn't touch me. The restraint was more painful than the violence had been. "I thought I could keep you as property. I thought I could protect you like a prize. But seeing you huddled on that floor while men came to kill you, I realized I can't be your protector and your ruin at the same time." He picked up the ticket and held it out. His hand was steady, but his eyes were a storm of unspoken grief. "Take it. Go back to being the girl who believes the world is safe." I looked at the ticket and then up at the man who had seen through every mask I'd ever worn. The old Bella, the librarian who hid in the stacks, would have taken it. She would have run and never looked back. But that girl had died the moment her lips touched his on a crowded dance floor. "You're a brilliant man, Derek Osmond," I whispered, my fingers brushing against his as I took the ticket. "But you're a terrible liar." I didn't pack a bag. I didn't look at the envelope. I looked only at him, waiting to see if he would let the mask slip one last time. The silence in the study was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a landslide. I looked down at the ticket in my hand, the physical manifestation of a safe life, and then I looked at the jagged line of the mountain ridge outside the window. I thought of the library, the dust, and the predictable quiet I had once cherished. It felt like a costume that no longer fit. Slowly, deliberately, I gripped the edges of the ticket. The sound of the cardstock tearing was loud in the stillness. I tore it once, then twice, until the fragments fluttered to the obsidian floor like snow. Derek's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. For a second he looked truly shaken. "Bella, what are you doing?" "I'm giving you a way out." "I don't want a way out," I said, my voice echoing with a newfound steel. "I want to be exactly where I am. You told me you don't have weaknesses, only property. Well, you were wrong. You have a partner. And if you think you're going to face the rest of the Vane Syndicate or whoever else tries to take this throne alone, You've clearly forgotten who initiated that kiss. I stepped toward him, closing the final gap. I reached out and took his handgun from the desk, weighing it in my hand before looking up at him. The old Bella Rose is gone, Derek. You didn't ruin her. You woke her up. The cold, calculated mask he wore finally shattered. A look of raw, devastating admiration flooded his eyes. He didn't say a word as he reached out, his hand tangling in my hair to pull me into a kiss that tasted of finality and a new, dark beginning. It wasn't a kiss of protection, it was a pact. The following weeks were a blur of cleaning. I sat in on meetings that would have once made my blood run cold, my librarian's mind organizing the chaos of his empire with a precision that even Derek hadn't expected. Together, we dismantled the remnants of the Vane family, not through just violence, but through a systematic erasure of their influence. I was the silent architect, he was the blade. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Metropolitan Library held a gala of a different kind. It was no longer a struggling institution. It was the crown jewel of the city, funded by an anonymous endowment that no one dared to question. I stood in the center of the grand hall, wearing a dress of black lace that made the silk bridesmaid dress from a year ago seem like a childhood memory. My reflection in the glass didn't show a girl hiding in the stacks. It showed a woman who had seen the darkness and decided to rule it. Derek appeared behind me, his hand resting possessively on my waist. He didn't need to check the room. His men were invisible but everywhere. He leaned down, his lips brushing my ear. Ready to go home, Bella? I looked at the ring on my finger, a heavy diamond set in black gold, and then at the man who had changed the very definition of my life. I am home, I whispered. We walked out of the gala together, stepping into the cool night air. The city lights twinkled below like fallen stars, but I didn't look at them. I looked only at the shadow beside me, knowing that while the world might be dangerous, I was the only thing the shadow of the north would never let fall. Love didn't have to be safe to be real, it just had to be absolute. 1 year after the Sapphire Gala shattered my quiet world, I stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite of the Osmond estate. I didn't see a clumsy librarian staring back at me. I didn't see the girl in the pale pink dress who had once fumbled with a champagne glass and worried about her rent. Now I was draped in black lace so fine it felt like a second skin, the fabric intricate and dark, shimmering with hand-stitched obsidian beads. It was a gown for a queen of shadows. My hair was swept up, held by a crown of black diamonds that Derek had placed on my head this morning, claiming it was the only thing in the city that could match the fire in my eyes. A soft knock sounded and my sister stepped into the room. She froze, her hand flying to her mouth. A year ago she had warned me that Derek's favor was a cage. Now she looked at me with a mixture of awe and dawning realization. "You look powerful, Bella," she whispered, stepping forward to adjust the heavy veil that trailed behind me like a storm cloud. "Are you still afraid?" I touched the massive diamond on my left hand, the mark of a pact that had been sealed in blood and refined in fire. "I'm terrified," I admitted, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. "But not of him. I'm terrified of how much I love the woman I've become by his side." Downstairs, the elite of the city waited in a ballroom lit by 1,000 black candles. They weren't just guests, they were subjects. They were the people who had once looked through me, and who now lowered their eyes when I entered a room. The heavy doors at the end of the hall opened and Derek stood there. He wasn't the shadow of the north, to me anymore. He was the man who had burned down a syndicate to keep me safe, and the man who had taught me that my flaw wasn't a lack of bravery, but a lack of something worth fighting for. He held out his hand, his eyes burning with a pride that was purely, devastatingly mine. I took it, my fingers steady, my heart full. We walked toward the altar not as predator and prey, but as equals. I had set a war in motion with a single desperate kiss, and today I was finally claiming the throne that rose from the ashes. Love didn't have to be safe to be real, it just had to be absolute. And in the darkness, we had found something more brilliant than the sun.